Once upon a time, a long time ago, there was a little girl who lived with her mommy and her daddy and her little brother Timmy in a blue house at the end of a long gravel driveway at the edge of a forest. And one of the things the little girl looked forward to every year was going to camp meeting. Oh, camp meeting was so much fun. She would get to see her friends, eat a pronto pup, have a snow cone, and best of all, get to go to the children's programs where she might get to make a craft or hear a story or sing songs about Jesus like, I'm in right, out right, up right, down right, happy all the time. She loved going to camp meeting, and this year camp meeting was going to be so special because they were renting a camper and they were going to get to stay at camp meeting for 10 whole days. Well, they got the camper a few days early and got it all packed up. They put all of their clothes and they put their food for the week and a few toys. And pretty soon the camper was ready to go to camp meeting. The morning finally arrived and the family was ready to go. But just before they walked out the door, the little girl lifted up her shirt and she said, Mommy, what's on my tummy? The mommy came and she looked closely and she said, we're not going to get to go to camp meeting. And the little girl said, why not? And the mommy said, you have chicken pox. Chicken pox? Well, in the olden days, chicken pox was a virus that you could get from other people. Nowadays, kids don't get it because there's a vaccination. But back then, you could get it from other people. And so if you had chickenpox, you had to be quarantined for 2 whole weeks and not be around anyone else so that you couldn't share your virus with them and that they would get the chickenpox. So there was going to be no camp meeting for the little girl that year. She was so sad. They unloaded the camper and they stayed home day after day. Well, one day the daddy said to the little girl, you're feeling better. Would you like to go on a hike in the woods with me? And the little girl said, oh, yes, Daddy, I would love to go on a hike in the woods. And so they put on their overalls and their red flannel shirts and their rubber boots and off they went. They went over the creek and through the swamp where the skunk cabbage grew and past the holly tree with the green pointed leaves and the red berries and up the hill. And as they climbed the hill, the little girl said, Daddy, what's that sound? And Daddy said, I don't hear anything. Daddy, I hear something. And Daddy said, I don't hear anything. Daddy, I think it's over there. Can we go look? And so the little girl and the daddy went deeper into the forest. And as they got deeper, the sound got a little louder. And pretty soon, they came upon something very sad. There was a little tiny baby deer, and it was stuck in blackberry vines, and it couldn't get free. And the mama deer was walking back and forth, and the little baby deer was going, and it was so high that the dad couldn't hear it. He said, my ears are too old. But your ears, you could hear the baby deer crying. And the little girl said, oh, Daddy, can we help the deer? And the daddy said, yep. And he pulled out his clippers and they cut those brambles and they were able to get the little baby deer free and helped set her off with her mommy. And the dad looked at the little girl and he said, honey, for such a time as this, you were here today to help save this baby deer. You know, there's a story in the Bible about a girl who was in the right place at the right time to be able to help some very special people to her. Now, when we first meet this girl, her name is Hadassah. Now, Hadassah was an orphan. That means her mom and dad had died when she was little, and she went to go live with her cousin, her much older cousin, Mordecai. And he adopted her and raised her as his very own, and he loved her so much. You see, Mordecai and Hadassah were from the tribe of Benjamin. That meant that they were Jews, and they were living in a country far away from their home country called Persia. And Mordecai raised Hadassah to know about the one true God and to teach her about how to be kind and loving to other people. And as she grew up, she became more and more beautiful on the outside. But even more importantly was how beautiful she was on the inside. You see, as she knew God, she became more kind and more loving to all of those around her. And one day, her cousin Mordecai said to her, "You know, Hadassah, I no longer think that you should be called Hadassah. I want you to have a new name. Your new name is going to be..." That's right. Her new name was Esther. Esther, which means bright, shining star. Esther the star, beautiful on the outside, but bright and shining from the inside with loving kindness. Well, as Esther grew into a young woman, there was an announcement that was made across the whole country of Persia that the king was looking for a new queen. And he was going to find his queen by having a special competition. And all of the eligible women who could become queen were to participate in this competition. Well, Esther was one of those women, and she was brought to a special place at the royal palace where she and all the other women were going to live for a whole year. Can you imagine living somewhere for a whole year just to get ready for one day of competition? Well, that's what it was for Esther and all the other women. They spent that whole year getting ready, and they did special beauty treatments to help their skin be more beautiful and took special baths. And they took time to learn, and they had lessons on what it would be like to live in the palace and what were the customs and traditions. I can imagine that she would learn things like, how do you drink out of a royal goblet, or how do you set the royal table? Because if she was queen, she should need to know all of these customs and cultures. Well, after the year passed, all of the young women were brought before the king, and he was to choose which would be his queen. And as he looked across the young woman, he saw one that caught his eye. You see, this woman was very beautiful on the outside, but there was also something special about her. He could see shining out of her a kindness, a way of treating others that really attracted him. And he said, "I choose that one right there to be my queen." You got it. He chose Esther. And he was so pleased about his new queen that he did something for the entire country. They had a huge party, and he had presents for everyone. It was a national holiday for everyone to celebrate and welcome Esther as the new queen of their country. Well, the king, his name was Xerxes, was a very busy man, and ruling a country is a lot of work. And so he had many different people who helped him. And one of those people became more and more important, who gave him good advice and helped him with ruling the country. And so one day, King Xerxes decided to promote this man to being the number 2 most important man in the country, kind of like the vice president of our country. And this man's name was Haman. Now, Haman was a very proud man. He felt himself to be very important. He had 10 sons, and he had worked very hard to rise to this very important role in the kingdom. In fact, he was so important that the king made a law. Now, there's something you should know about king's laws. And the king of Persia, when he signed a law with his special ring, it was called the signet ring. He would stamp it with his signet ring, and that meant that law was going to last forever and ever. No one could change the law. Well, he made a law that said when Haman walked down the street, that all the people on either side were not just to nod and say, "Hello, Mr. Haman." No, they were to bow. They were to get all the way down to their knees and touch their forehead to the ground and give honor to Haman as the number 2 most important person in the kingdom. Haman loved to walk down the street importantly and watch all of the people bowing down to him as he walked down the street. But there was one person when he walked past that would never bow down. This made Haman pretty upset. Why did this man think he didn't have to bow down to Haman? After all, it was one of the king's laws. Well, he did a little investigation and discovered that this man's name was, you got it, it was Mordecai, Queen Esther's cousin. Now, Haman didn't know that that was Queen Esther's cousin. No. He just knew that there was this man, Mordecai, that wouldn't bow. And so he asked his friends and his wife what he should do about this man. Well, they did a little investigation and they learned that Mordecai was a Jew. And so they said, well, you could just get rid of Mordecai, but if you did, there's so many other Jews in this country and they probably won't bow down to you either. What you need to do is you need to get rid of all of the Jews in the whole country. Mordecai thought, that's a pretty good idea. But how am I going to convince the king that he needs to write a law? Well, Haman came up with a great plan. And he went to the king and he said, "Oh, you wise and wonderful king, you have made such amazing laws that the people of your land are so wonderful and follow them faithfully because you have written such good laws. But there's one group of people here in this country. They don't obey your laws. It's very sad that they don't obey your laws, and I want to help you get rid of these people. In fact, if you let me get rid of these people, I will put 375 tons of silver in your treasury." Well, the king thought about it and he thought, well, if there's people that won't obey my laws and I can fill my treasury, what a great idea. Of course, Haman, you may write a law and let me give you my royal signet ring and you may stamp the law and make it happen. And so Haman left and he wrote a law that on a certain day at a certain time, all of the Jews of the country of Persia were going to be killed. And he stamped it with the signet ring and the law was taken out and read throughout the country. Now the Jewish people, they became so distressed. What were they going to do? Well, Mordecai knew what to do. He decided that he needed to send a message to his dear Esther. He couldn't talk to her face to face because Mordecai was weeping and grieving, and he had ripped his clothes and put ashes on his head because he was so distressed. But he wrote a letter to Esther and sent it to her. And in his letter, he said, "Esther, this law to kill all of the Jews is going to happen to you too. Just because you're queen in the palace doesn't mean that you are safe. You can be killed as well with all of your people. Will you please go before the king and ask him to spare the lives of your people? We, out here of the palace, will spend the next 3 days praying and asking God to go with you, for you to go and ask the king to spare his people." Well, Queen Esther, she was worried. And then she looked at the last line in the letter, and it said, "Who knows? Maybe you are queen for such a time as this to help save your people." Queen Esther stopped and she thought about it, and she knew she would do whatever she could to help her people. But there was a problem. If she was going to go before the king, she would have to enter his throne room uninvited. And there was a law that said anyone who entered the king's throne room uninvited would be killed unless the king extended his golden scepter. Oh, what would Queen Esther do? If she went, she could die. But she realized how important it was for her to go and ask the king to spare her people. And so she said, "If I perish, I perish." And so she spent the next 3 days praying and asking God to go with her. And finally it was time. And she put on her royal robes and prepared herself to go to the king. And she walked slowly down the corridor until she stood right outside the throne room, not knowing if her next step would be the last. As she entered the royal throne room, the king, Xerxes, looked up. "Who dares come in without permission to my throne room? Off!" "Oh, it's my queen. It's Queen Esther." And he reached out his royal scepter and he welcomed her to his throne room. "What is it, my darling queen? You may ask me for anything, even up to half my kingdom." Esther, grateful for the extension of the royal scepter, took a deep breath and she said, "O king, I have prepared a royal banquet in my chambers and I would like for you to come and eat it with me. this very night. And will you bring your number one assistant, Haman, with you to this dinner?" And the king, very interested and curious about what this all meant, said, "Of course, we will be there." Queen Esther returned to her royal rooms where she finished preparing her dinner for the king, and soon the king and Haman arrived, and they all sat around eating the delicious food that Esther had prepared. Haman was feeling pretty cool. He thought he was hot stuff, man, the king and the queen, and he was getting to have private dinner with both of them. But there was more to come. The king looked at Esther and he said, "Thank you for having us to this beautiful dinner. But again, I want to know, what is it, Esther, that you want? What is it? You may ask me for anything, even up to half my kingdom." And Queen Esther, she took a deep breath and she said, "O king, there is only one thing that I wish to ask for. I wish to ask that you would spare my life and the lives of all my people. There is an order for us all to be killed." King Xerxes was irate. Who would dare to write a law that his queen would be killed? And so he asked Esther, "Who has made this happen?" And Queen Esther looked around at the other person in the room and she pointed her finger and she said, "That man, that evil Haman has written this law." The king was furious with Haman. He ordered Haman to be taken away forever and ever. And he asked his dear Esther, "What can I do?" And Esther told him the whole story and told him about her cousin Mordecai. And the king invited Mordecai to come. And he made Mordecai his number 2 in place of Haman. He gave him the royal signet ring. And he asked him to write a law that would be signed, that would last, that would protect the Jewish people and save their lives. Queen Esther was there in Persia, in the palace, for such a time as this, to save her people. Boys and girls, we are all God's children, just like Queen Esther, and he has a plan for our lives. We never know what might be coming. Esther didn't know she was going to go live in the palace, but whatever it is, God is in charge and he knows exactly what it is and how he will be able to help us serve him and save other people for him. I encourage you to think in your own lives when you're facing hard times or there's something that happens that you don't understand. Maybe you don't get to go to camp meeting when you thought you had the opportunity to do something you wanted to do more than anything else you'd ever wanted. That Jesus loves you. He has a plan for your life and he will live it through you.